welcome back to the second half of NEWSBREAK Live, and joining me is Lieutenant Jeremiah Hart from the Torrance Police Department. Thanks so much for being on my show.
Thank you.
And you're on tonight to discuss a very relevant topic of active shooter situations, as we recently saw the tragedy that just happened in Las Vegas. And I think this active shooter situation was a bit different, many may say, because the shooter was at a separate location and people can identify where the shooting was coming from. Do you think this was harder for people to react and take action?
Yeah, so a situation like this it's tense, it's uncertain, and it happens very quickly. And we see patterns all the time when it comes to active threats. And when I heard about what happened in Las Vegas, it did remind me of what happened years ago at the Texas Tower incident, where you had an attacker who was in an elevated position and was starting to shoot at people. And it's very difficult to identify, even when somebody's on the ground, where it's happening. So that did add an element into this that was unusual and we haven't seen in a long time, that makes it difficult to find out where the threat is coming from so you can make a good choice on where you should go to seek safety.
Lieutenant Hart, you're an instructor for active shooter situations and teaching people the steps they can take to prevent themselves from getting hurt. I mean, what are some of those steps?
Yeah, so it's important that we have options ahead of time so we can make good choices. And especially during a critical incident, because human performance doesn't increase and get better, it actually gets harder to make good decisions. So we really follow a principle-based approach based on an idea of usually called run, hide, or fight, or sometimes called run, hide, defend. And the idea is, if you can, the minute you realize something is happening, we want you to get away from the threat. That's the first thing of run or move away safely. And if you can't get away, then the second step is find the safest place to hide, hopefully a room that you can lock and barricade in. And then as a last resort, which is extremely rare, if the attacker is right there next to you, then we need to talk about this idea of defending your life. Now, personal safety is a personal choice. And so it's important for people to decide ahead of time, I'm going to do whatever I can for me to protect myself so I can go back to my family or protect my family in the moment. So those are things we need to think about ahead of time before something happens and not try to figure it out in the moment of a crisis.
Every situation can be different, as we saw the one that just happened in Las Vegas. Is there one step, you go into flight or fight situation that you just mentioned, one step that people should remember to take?
The first thing that people need to remember is to trust your instincts. What we see over and over again from studying hundreds of active threat, active shooter incidents, is it takes a moment for people to realize that something's really happening. We've had active shooter incidents in the United States that have happened in malls, and people hear gunshots, but they think it's a balloon popping, or they think that it might be a car backfiring. And then there are people that trust their instincts and go, I think that might be a gunshot. I don't really know, but I know what I should do is move to safety. Let's just move right now and be sure. So trust your instincts, number one, is probably the single most important thing for people to do.
And when it comes to looking for shelter, what should people look out for?
So when it comes to moving to safety, there's a difference between what we'd commonly call in law enforcement or in the military cover versus concealment. And so concealment means something you can hide behind. So if I was out in the open and I got behind a bush and the attacker couldn't see me, that would be considered concealment. But bullets can still travel through that. So cover would be something like a big cinder block wall or a planter that I can get behind that could stop bullets. The biggest thing to do is move to the safest location that's closest to you that you can find, and then from there you could choose the best one, but you need to move to safety as quick as possible. Something that hides you from the view of the attacker, or something hopefully, optimally, hides you from the view and protects you from bullets.
Is there a way that people can really be prepared? As I just mentioned, every situation is different. It could be a work setting, a live entertainment venue, or another place.
Right. When it comes down to, it's important for everybody to remember that these types of incidents, and they get a lot of coverage in the news when they happen, but statistically they are rare. These are rare incidents and they don't happen all the time. And we talk about trusting your instincts and what to do. The most important thing though for people to remember is to have a plan ahead of time and to practice that plan. And what that simply means is when you're at a public place, like let's say a mall, and you're sitting in the food court, just running, if something happened right now, where's my safest exit to go to? Where would I go? And we're not talking about being hyper vigilant or always scared. You know, local law enforcement here, law enforcement in the United States does a really good job of addressing these issues, but it's having a plan and practicing that plan, and that practice could just be mental rehearsal of, if something happened right now, this is the safest location I would go to. That could save somebody's life during a critical incident.
And we're talking about exits, being well aware of where they are.
Correct. Yeah, we're talking about exits. We're talking about being aware they are. You know, when you go to an airport and your security line and everybody's kind of getting bunched up, you know, where would I go right now if something was going to happen? We had an employee here at the city of Torrance that was at the LAX airport when the active shooter incident happened there. And, you know, at an airport, there's really no safe place to go into a room and lock doors. So the safest thing for them to do was to exit the location of the airport and go out on the tarmac and hide behind a big piece of machinery. So that's a principle-based approach of, where is the safest place for me to go, and you know, how close is that to me, and just have a plan ahead of time.
You just mentioned Torrance Police Department member. There were quite a few that were actually at this festival. Have you had the chance to talk to them about kind of what they did?
Yeah, I did. I did talk with them. You know, what's interesting, you know, even for law enforcement officers are there, you know, they're off duty. They're not wearing a uniform. They're not armed. So it's a different context. And the same thing happened where it took them a moment to realize what was happening, but they realized that pretty quickly, and then their training instantly kicked in. And you know, over and over again, from sworn law enforcement officers, people with military experience, and people who have just thought about this issue, if they've ever been around an active shooter incident, what happens is it takes them a second for them to realize what's happening, but then their training kicks in. We need to have a plan ahead of time and not try to figure it out in the moment.
Can these simple steps really save your life, you would say? I know there was a couple in the news reports that said their personal, you know, learning from their active shooter training at work to help them, you know, escape that situation.
Yeah, it does. And we've seen time and time again when active shooter incidents have happened that people that have been around those incidents, that have thought about it ahead of time, are able to make good choices. And that's what it comes down to. We need a couple simple options for an active threat, and then to realize that those are your best choices in the moment. Like we talked about, a principle-based approach. So this idea of run, hide, defend is something that we go out and talk about with people to teach them and educate them on active threat, active shooter incidents. And it applies not only to if somebody came into a location with a handgun, but if somebody came into a location like we've seen in Europe with a machete. Those same principles of moving away from danger, if you can't move away, find somewhere to hide, and if you had to be an attack, defend yourself, apply for a multitude of threats, not just somebody armed with a handgun. So that's where we want a principle-based approach, and we want to think about it ahead of time.
As I mentioned earlier, you've instructed many seminars right here for Torrance City employees. Are there frequent questions you get from people that may be of interest to our viewers? Yeah,
you know, probably the most frequent question is, you know, how do we prevent it? And you know, we spend a lot of time talking about prevention. And when it comes to prevention for these, really number one is we need a whole community approach. The Torrance Police Department puts a lot of effort in partnerships with critical assets in the city of Torrance to offer training. We do annual training with all of the hospitals in the city of Torrance, and they have phenomenal security plans. We do annual training with the Del Amo Mall and the Simon Corporation, which is a huge draw of people in our city. We do annual training and drills with them. We do annual training with the entire TUSD, Torrance Unified School District. All of their teachers have been trained in partnership with the Torrance Police Department, and we continue to do that all the time. But we also need, if you see something, you need to say something, preferably to law enforcement. A lot of times these types of issues are mental health issues. The Torrance Police Department has a Torrance mental health evaluation team that are experts in what they do, partnered with LA County. And the way to prevent it, like we said, is an whole community approach where if you see something suspicious, say something to either a manager where you work or to the police department. If you hear something suspicious, if you hear somebody come into work and say, I've had this place, I'm going to come back and shoot it up, we need to assume that that is real. We need to call law enforcement because we have procedures in place that we can implement to really increase people's safety for those types of incidents. So I can't stress enough the whole community approach. That's the only way we're going to be effective as a community in reducing and preventing these types of crimes.
There are many resources online on helping people to prepare and steps to take, like the ones you mentioned earlier. You just talked about different, places that you've taught this type of training. For regular residents in the area, is there a place they can go to take a class or anything like that? Or are there any resources you recommend?
Yeah, so resources I would recommend. The Torrance Police Department is one of the only local law enforcement agencies that were invited to Washington, D.C. to sit on a national panel to look at how can we get this information of run, hide, defend, or strategies to stay safe during these events and push it out to the public and into the private sector for businesses for a whole community approach. So if you went online and you went to the Department of Homeland Security and just Googled that with active shooter, there's a video on YouTube, on Google called Run, Hide, Fight. It talks about all the principles we just discussed in greater detail so people can have an idea of what they should do, or share with family members that you're concerned about, to have them watch that video, because that gives you a better idea of what we want to do. And the Torrance Police Department right now is working on creating a new and updated course that we hope we'll be able to offer to the public on really give a balanced approach to what these threats are. These are the things that look for that are suspicious. Here's how we want you to report it if you hear something. And also talk about this idea of medical care. Because so often an active shooter incident really is a medical emergency where we need to get life-saving medical treatment to people right away. And so we have a special program with the Torrance Fire Department. We have all of their members are trained. We have Torrance tactical medics that go into the crisis site location with our police officers to get life-saving medical attention to people. But I would say, if you go online, the Run, Hide, Fight video produced by the Department of Homeland Security is a really good place to start.
And speaking of training, in the future, do you see the training you teach to people evolve over time with all these different situations happening across the country? Yeah,
it does, and you've seen it evolve because we want to give people answers in this whole community approach, not only for somebody armed with a firearm or something with as extreme as what we saw in Las Vegas, but you think about the Boston bombing at the marathon. Here's an idea of backpacks left out in the open at a high-profile event. That's a see something, say something moment nowadays, because it's going to take all of us to really identify these types of hazards and then getting the right resources there to see if it's if it's not really suspicious or if it is an indicator of an attack that might be imminent.
Lieutenant Hart, thank you so much for your time. I think a lot of viewers will walk away with the point that we have to be prepared beforehand.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, that does it for NewsBreak Live. If you ever have news or video that you'd like to share, please email us at newsbreak@torranceca.gov. And don't forget to tune into the Torrance City Council meeting tonight. For Facebook and Twitter users, use #NewsBreakLive. Have a great night.